One small country in West Africa just told one of the world's most powerful nations to pack up and leave. We are talking about Senegal. French troops are gone. Decades of military agreements were tossed. Why? Because Senegal decided it was done playing by the old rules of colonial influence.
As French people, could you imagine seeing us in your country with tanks or military vehicles, with Senegalese soldiers in Senegalese uniforms? That's what history has been like. France has enslaved, colonized, and remained.
So, the question is, how did we get here? And more importantly, what does this mean for Africa's future? Let's find out. So, here's the deal. Senegal just made headlines by telling French troops to leave. Yep, you heard that right. The same French troops that have been stationed there for decades under the banner of security cooperation. Now, this isn't just some casual request. It's a statement. It's Senegal standing up and saying, we're ready to take charge of our destiny. But why now?
As it continues to lose influence over its former colonies in Africa. In the latest, tensions are brewing between France and its former colony of Senegal. Dakar has asked Paris to come clean and state facts on the 1944 massacre of African soldiers. On Sunday, Senegal marked the 80th anniversary of the brutal killing of African soldiers who fought for France during the Second World War and were gunned down by French troops for demanding fair treatment and payment on their return. France's Foreign Affairs Minister was also in attendance at the ceremony, along with other African heads of state. For years, the West African country has demanded that France take responsibility, officially apologize, and investigate the 1944 massacre in Traoré, a fishing village near the capital of Dakar. The atrocity has long been a bone of contention between the two countries. The French military claims that somewhere between 35 to 75 soldiers were killed. However, historians assert that nearly 400 people died. There has been mounting international pressure to exhume mass graves to verify the official death toll. Paris has been accused of falsifying or hiding records. Days before the commemoration, French President Emmanuel Macron, in a letter to his Senegalese counterpart, Diomaye Faye, referred to these killings as a massacre. He also said that France was cooperating with Senegal to establish the truth. Senegal's president said that Macron's acknowledgement, a first, was a significant step in the process of rehabilitating the honor and dignity of the victims. Earlier this year, the Senegalese Prime Minister accused France of trying to unilaterally determine the way it had treated the African soldiers who served in its armies. Now, this comes as France is losing influence over its former African colonies. Many of them have turned to Russia for security and other assistance, and France is facing growing opposition to its military presence. Francophone countries in West and Central Africa, including Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali, that have been taken over by military juntas, have expelled French forces. Recently, Chad, one of the last countries in the region where France maintained its military presence, ended a defense cooperation agreement with Paris. Last week, Senegal's President Faye has said that France should close its military bases in the country. Senegal still hosts around 350 French troops, mainly in a supportive role. Faye, who came to power this year with promises of ending dependence on foreign powers, said that French bases were incompatible with Senegal's sovereignty. So, is France set to witness another setback in Africa? Will Senegal be the next one to shut its doors to France? Will Dakar too turn to Moscow? Or can the US fill in for its ally France? That remains to be seen.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? To understand this, you've got to think bigger. This isn't just about military bases. It's about independence, pride, and shaking off the weight of history. You see, Senegal won its independence in 1960, on paper at least. But the presence of foreign troops has always been a reminder of true independence. That's something they've been working toward ever since. For years, people in Senegal have looked at those bases and thought, why are they still here? It's like winning a race but having someone stand on the podium with you holding your trophy. Doesn't feel right, does it? So, Senegal decided enough was enough. And honestly, it's a bold move. But before we dive into what this means, let's backtrack a bit. How did French troops even end up in Senegal in the first place? All right, let's rewind the clock. French troops didn't just show up one day out of the blue. Their presence in Senegal goes way back to the colonial era. Back then, France wasn't just a partner, it was the boss. Senegal was a French colony, part of a system that stretched across Africa, pulling resources, labor, and control toward Europe. Even after Senegal gained independence in 1960, French troops didn't pack up and leave. Instead, they stayed under the pretense of maintaining security and stability. At first, this arrangement seemed practical. After all, newly independent nations often face challenges, unrest, regional threats, and the struggle to build their institutions. France was supposed to help with all that. But over time, things started to feel off. Those bases, those soldiers, they weren't just there for Senegal's benefit, they were a symbol of France's lingering influence in West Africa. And while they were supposed to provide security, people started asking, security from what and for whom?
Anti-French sentiment has always been here.
L'Afrique est devenue un terrain propice à l'affrontement de différentes visions de l'ordre international.
French is and will always be the former colonial power.
Ce qu'il se produit aujourd'hui sur le continent africain, c'est bien entendu un rejet de plus en plus massif de la politique étrangère et de sécurité menée par la France.
It has that negative legacy that is still here.
Les programmes de développement n'ont pas été perçus comme ayant amélioré le quotidien des populations.
Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. This wasn't just about protecting Senegal, it was about protecting France's interests. Strategic access, political leverage, and a foothold in a key region are what those bases represented. So after decades of this arrangement, Senegal finally said, thanks, but no thanks. But here's the thing. Senegal isn't alone in this. Senegal's decision isn't just a one-off thing. It's part of a much bigger wave sweeping across Africa, a wave of countries reclaiming their autonomy and saying goodbye to foreign military presence. Let's start with Mali. They were one of the first to show France the door. After years of frustration, Mali's government made it clear they weren't happy with the results of French intervention. They argued that French troops weren't addressing the real security threats and were instead making things worse. So, they cut ties. Then came Burkina Faso. Facing similar frustrations, they too decided to part ways with France. And recently, Niger has been making headlines for pushing back against French influence. It's like watching dominoes fall, one after the other. But here's what makes Senegal's move stand out. Senegal has always been seen as one of France's strongest allies in West Africa. For years, it was the shining example of a stable, cooperative partnership. So when Senegal makes a move like this, it's not just a crack in the system, it's a full-on shift in the narrative. What's driving this trend? Simple. These countries are waking up to the realization that foreign military presence often comes with strings attached. It's not about partnership, it's about control. And now, one by one, they're breaking free.
Hello. Resetting France's ties with Africa has long been a foreign policy priority for President Macron. But it's now Africa that's deciding what sort of relationship that it wants with France, the former colonial power. Where does Russia fit into all of this? Where does China fit into all of this too? We've got loads to discuss today with three expert panelists on Inside Story. Come and join the conversation wherever you watch Al Jazeera, on TV, online, or on YouTube.
Here's the thing. For many Senegalese, the presence of French troops wasn't just a military issue. It was an emotional one. Those bases, those soldiers, they were daily reminders of a colonial past that's hard to forget. Sure, independence came in 1960, but when foreign troops are still stationed on your soil decades later, it doesn't exactly scream freedom, does it? For years, this frustration simmered beneath the surface, but it wasn't just about the past, it was about the future. Younger generations in Senegal grew up questioning why their country needed foreign troops at all. They looked around and saw a nation rich in culture, resources, and potential. And they asked, why aren't we doing this ourselves? This decision is a direct response to those questions. It's a way of saying, we're ready, we're capable, and we don't need anyone else telling us how to run our country. And that's why this moment is so powerful. It's not just about troops leaving, it's about reclaiming dignity, pride, and control. But while Senegal is gaining something huge, France is losing even more. Let's talk about what this means for them. France is losing a lot more than a military base here. For decades, Senegal was one of France's key allies in Africa. Losing that relationship? It's a major blow, not just strategically, but symbolically.
French President Emmanuel Macron said he wants a rethink of French military postures in Africa. Macron made the comments during an address to French troops on Wednesday. He added that he had asked his ministers and army chiefs to work on it. Macron's comments come ahead of a visit by French officials to Niger, which is expected to redefine the country's strategy to fight Islamist militants in the Sahel. Concerns have been growing about the withdrawal of some 2,400 French troops from Mali, the epicenter of violence in the Sahel region. It has sparked fears of worsening violence, destabilizing neighbors, and spurring migration. The withdrawal is expected to be completed by the end of the summer. French officials have pledged they would continue to help West African armies fight insurgent groups, adding that the onus going forward would be on regional countries to lead on security while also focusing more on development.
Think about it. France has long relied on its former colonies to maintain its influence in Africa. Military bases like the ones in Senegal weren't just about security, they were about control. They gave France a seat at the table in West African politics, a way to keep its hand in the region's affairs. Now, with Senegal saying au revoir, that grip is slipping. And it's not just Senegal. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, they're all making similar moves. For France, it's like watching their house of cards come tumbling down.
Ce continent qui a tant souffert et qui continue de souffrir du fait des impérialistes. Ces impérialistes n'ont qu'un seul cliché en tête. L'Afrique est l'empire des esclaves. C'est comme ça qu'ils voient l'Afrique. Pour eux, les Africains les appartiennent. Nos terres les appartiennent. Nos sous-sols les appartiennent. Ils n'ont jamais pu changer de logiciel.
But it's not just about politics. France is also losing access. Economic ties, cultural programs, and diplomatic leverage. All of these are harder to maintain without that military presence. And let's not forget the reputational hit. France has always positioned itself as a partner to African nations. But with so many countries pushing back, that narrative is falling apart. The big question now is, with France out of the picture, how will Senegal handle its security? This is the part where people start to wonder, okay, great, the troops are gone, now what? Security doesn't just take care of itself, especially in a region like West Africa, where threats like insurgency and organized crime are very real. But here's the thing, Senegal has a plan. They're not just kicking France out, they're building something better. The government is ramping up its investment in the military, focusing on training, modernization, and self-sufficiency. The goal? To create a defense system that can stand on its own 2 feet. And they're not doing it alone. Senegal is working closely with its neighbors, teaming up with countries like Mali and Burkina Faso to tackle regional threats together. It's a smart move. Security challenges in West Africa don't stop at borders, so cooperation is key. But there's another piece to this puzzle. New partnerships. Countries like Turkey, China, and Russia are stepping in to offer support. Unlike France, these nations don't come with the same colonial baggage. For Senegal, that's a big win. So, while the road ahead won't be easy, one thing is clear. Senegal isn't backing down. They're stepping up, taking charge, and proving that African nations can handle their challenges. But this isn't just about Senegal. It's part of a much bigger story, one that's reshaping the entire continent. Let me be clear, this move isn't just about troops and military bases. It's about so much more. This is Senegal saying, we're redefining our relationship with France, top to bottom. Because this isn't just a security issue. It's about the economy, politics, and even culture. For decades, Senegal's economy has been closely tied to France. Trade agreements, investments, and even the currency. The West African CFA franc are all part of a system heavily influenced by Paris. And while these ties have their benefits, they also come with a price. Many Senegalese feel like their economy isn't as independent as it could be, with too many decisions still linked to what's best for France. This decision to send French troops packing is a signal that Senegal is ready to start asking tough questions, like, are these trade deals really working for us? Or, why are we still using a currency that ties us to our colonial past? But it's not just about money. There's a cultural angle too. Senegal has always had strong ties to France, shared language, and shared history. But as generations grow up further removed from colonial times, there's a shift happening. People are asking, do we need to hold on to this relationship in the same way? This is about evolving, about creating a new dynamic where Senegal and France can still work together, but as equals. And honestly, that's a shift not just for Senegal, but for Africa as a whole. Speaking of Africa, what does this move mean for the rest of the continent? All right, let's zoom out. This isn't just about Senegal, it's about the whole continent. Because when Senegal takes a step like this, it sends a message. Africa is done waiting for permission. It's done playing second fiddle. For decades, African nations have been told that they need outside help, military aid, financial aid, and political guidance. But more and more countries are standing up and saying, no thanks, we'll figure it out ourselves. And Senegal's decision to end its military ties with France, it's a perfect example of that mindset. Here's the thing. Senegal isn't just doing this for itself. Moves like this inspire other nations. They show what's possible. When Mali kicked out French troops, it made people ask, what's stopping us? When Burkina Faso followed, it made that idea even stronger. And now that Senegal, one of France's closest allies, is doing the same, the ripple effect is undeniable. But this isn't just about getting rid of foreign influence. It's about what comes next. It's about African nations working together, supporting each other, and creating systems that work for them, not for anyone else. And let's not forget the symbolism. Moves like this challenge the old narrative that Africa is dependent, weak, or chaotic. They show a continent that's bold, capable, and ready to lead. So the question is, who's next? One thing's for sure, Senegal's decision is just the beginning. Let's wrap this up. Senegal just pulled off one of the boldest moves we've seen in a long time. It didn't just ask French troops to leave, it sent a message to the world. We're ready to take control of our future. This isn't just about security. It's about pride, independence, and setting a new standard for what African nations can achieve. And while France might be scrambling to figure out its next move, Senegal is already looking ahead. The real question now, who's next? Because let's be real, this isn't just a Senegal story. This is an African story. And the rest of the continent is watching, learning, and getting ready to make their moves. So here's the takeaway. Senegal didn't just kick out French troops. It kicked out the idea that Africa needs to rely on anyone else to thrive. And honestly, that's a future worth celebrating. Do you think Africa is no longer under France's control? What would happen if France is out completely? Let us know in the comments section. Will French-Africa ties be on African terms now? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about. The Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.